Pagans didn't lose because they got defeated by arguments or anything. They got defeated because they became illegal.
In the 4th century, the children of pagan aristocrats got into the woke cult of the time. They were like the ones who made it possible for an emperor like Constantine to take the stage.
It's like your typical university liberals that are getting all the downtrodden to rally around them and say, you're the victim here. You guys are the ones. That same atmosphere that you get today was like how the Christians were in the 4th century.
What we've had is the largest migration of human beings probably anywhere in history, and they're not all from one place, they're from all over the bloody place. What are they supposed to assimilate to? So they're all speaking a different language, they don't speak English, it's complete chaos. They have to go. There's no other solution, they have to be deported.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Break the Rules. I am live here today with Survive the Jive, Gnostic Informant, and we are here for a follow-up to the original episode where we were talking about these pagan, heathen spiritual practices, ancestor worship, the connection that one has with their ancestors, and what that means for their reincarnation. And today we're going to be talking about the more practical side of this, whether it's possible for people who have embraced Christianity and Islam and other religions to return to this much more primeval source, and what exactly the limitations here are. So I want to thank everybody for watching. This is going to the patrons first, patreon.com/breaktherules, and then it's going to be edited and brought out to all of you guys. So if you guys want to support the show, consider becoming a patron, and you're going to get to see this before it comes out in the final form, raw, unedited. So anyway, we're going to be talking right now to Tom. Tom, please let me know what you think of the scenario. You are somebody who is mixed race. Half of you could say, comes from English stock, and you want to embrace the teachings of Tom Rousel, Survive the Jive, but part of you is thinking, oh man, like, am I pure enough when it comes to my English ancestry to be able to participate in this? What would be your answer?
I actually get that question quite a lot, over and over and over for the last 7 or 8 years. People keep asking me it, and I always say the same thing, that while ancestry is important when you're choosing the tradition, I think it does matter. It's not really a problem. There's no question of purity. It doesn't really matter. I mean, Native Americans have this idea, right? You have to have some Native American ancestry to be a Native American, but they don't have. The different tribes have different amounts. Some of them are happy if you're at least a quarter Native American, then you're part of the tribe. And a lot of Native Americans don't really practice the traditional religions anymore. They sometimes have aspects of it. But anyway, that's, the people who participate in those rituals of the whatever are usually people who have descended from the tribes. Originally, it's the same with all pagan religions. You've got to have some ancestry. But in Japan as well, if you're Japanese, you practice Shinto. To some extent, you might not say you're religious, you might not write Shinto down as your religion, but you do some kind of Shinto rituals at some times of year. And if you're of partial Korean or British or whatever ancestry, it doesn't really make any difference. If you're raised in Japan, you're part of Japanese culture. But then if you don't have any Japanese ancestry and you attempt to be Shinto, which some people actually are doing, and they're saying that Shinto has no ancestral component necessary to it and anyone can be Shinto, this is just not really true, because it is part of being Japanese. Being Shinto is just part of the cultural package of Japaneseness. So, but there's never a question of excluding people for being impure or something like that.
Is there a limit, though? For example, if somebody has 0.1 Japanese ancestry, like somewhere in their 23andMe, they found that one of their ancestors mated with somebody from Japan, would that count? Where exactly is the limit here?
There's ethnicity is at the sort of intersection of culture and race. So there has to be some racial descent, heritage, you could say, instead of race. Or ancestry instead of race is maybe better to say. So you have to have some ancestry, but you also have to some culture. If you're raised in England and you're 75% English, but you're 25% Japanese, you're quarter Japanese, like one grandparent, but you've never had any experience in Japanese culture, it's not really authentic for you to suddenly say, oh, I'm Shinto, and then start doing it, because you're not really enculturated into Shinto. You're just doing it because you're trying to get in touch with your roots. Maybe it can become authentic after a while. Like if you move to Japan, immersed yourself totally in your Japanese that quarter, and sort of moved away from your 75% Englishness, then eventually it would maybe become authentic. And also there is no like set amount, because even within America, different Native American tribes have different amounts of percentages of which is acceptable to them. They set how much ancestry you need to have in order to join there or to be considered a member of their tribe. There is no obviously set rule in paganism for how much ancestry you have to have from a thing. But of course, to be authentic, you need to be somewhat like from that culture, from that part of, and if the largest part, I'd advise people, but this isn't a rule, it's just an advice, if you wish to become a pagan, to pursue the pagan traditions of the people who form the largest part of your ancestry. That's my advice. But it's not necessarily, if you have a greater cultural connection to a smaller part of your ancestry, then maybe that would be more authentic.
And Neil, we were talking about Carl Jung and what he was saying regarding language. When you pick up a new language, in a way you imbue the spirit of those people who spoke the language into yourself. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that Jung was talking about in particular for this is not only is there genetics, that it's blood and DNA, but another part of the being is the language you speak. Being a native English speaker comes along with sort of a spirit of all of the Anglo-Saxon, Latin / Germanic idioms that come up in the language. You don't even realize it, but you're living it. You're living a spirit that came before you. So speaking a language has almost, it's not the same as genetics and blood, but it has a different, almost as important, but in a different way, and more of a spiritual, metaphysical sense. And also another thing too is the idea of like adapting and exporting and importing religions is an interesting thing, because I mean even the Edda, I think it's the prologue of the Edda, mentions that the Aesir were imported into Scandinavia. And so there is this aspect that's already of importing and exporting deities. Well, go ahead, Tom. What do you?
I'm going to say something to everyone. Please be aware that there's two Eddas: the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda. The Poetic Edda is reliably pagan era poems. The Prose Edda is Snorri Sturluson, a Christian chieftain, writing out the myths in his thing. And in the prologue to this Prose Edda is just Snorri making shit up. It's got nothing.
Is
to
it
do
really?
With paganism. It's just him making stuff up.
Yeah,
so
I would know. You would know that before.
He's a Christian. Everyone knows this. Is like the Christian prologue to the Prose Edda is him neutralizing the pagan myths for the Christian audience, so that he doesn't get accused of promoting paganism. So he's saying the gods aren't gods; they're just chieftains from Turkey or from Scythia or whatever. It's completely not in any part of any.
I was just going to say it sounds like he's euhemerizing these guys.
Yeah, it's euhemerism.
Yeah,
it's standard all across Europe for Christians at that time to euhemerize the gods as a part of a sort of nationalist technique, because you want to celebrate your ancestors, but the problem is your ancestors were pagan. So
yeah,
if you are, either the pagans were demon worshippers, which isn't very flattering if you're a nationalistic kind of guy, or slightly more flattering, they were worshipping great kings or wizards or something like that who deceived them. So if he can say Odin wasn't a demon, he was a king of Turkey, which is a very important place in Christianity, well, that's much more flattering. So he's saying, Odin was a man from the same part of the world as Christianity comes from, and he was not.
Yeah, so it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah. It's nothing to do. It's not in the myths. It's not in any runes. It's nothing to do with this.
The only reason why I think there might be something to that, though, is the Aesir having the cognate with Asuras, and there being this might be some sort of older.
Well, that could be Indo-European. That's Indo-European. If that cognate is real, which I'm not sure if it is, because some people tell me it isn't.
Some people say it isn't. I've heard people say it isn't too. Yeah,
I've heard people say both things. I'm not a great. I don't know about Iranic linguistics, so I can't tell you. But
we got to get Jason Churchani on for a stream later on to talk about the Iranian part of it.
If it could be, and if it is, it's probably because of an Indo-European route, which means it comes from Ukraine, which is not really that far away, or even Ukraine, because the last common ancestor of the Iranics and the Germans is not in Ukraine. It's further north up towards Lithuania, somewhere like that, or even near Moscow. So it would be somewhere from that region.
There is a sort of a precedent for this, but it always is filtered through the local traditions. So the Romans were the ones who really, really did this well. As the lands that the Romans would colonize, these cults would stay intact. So even in the Arabian cults, they still worshipped Elagabalus and Dusaris and Al-Alat. They still had their Arabian gods. And then they would even send ambassadors to Rome. I just recorded a 4-hour video on this. It's coming out. It's 4 hours and 40 minutes on the Oriental cults of Rome, the last stage of the pagan Roman Empire. So from like 200 AD to 400 AD cults that were not only in Roman colonies. So Arabia had its Dusaris, Egypt had Serapis and Isis, Phrygia had Attis and Cybele, Syria had Adonis and Astarte. I can go on and on and on. I can go on and on. Mithra in the Cilician pirates. These cults stayed where they were at, but they also would send ambassadors to Rome, and they would there would be temples to Osiris, the Arabian deity, in Rome. We found the archaeology of it. There's temples of Isis in Rome, and these were basically ambassadors to the Egyptians or whoever else there's a temple to Adonis. It'd be the ambassadors to the Syrians, but they kept their local traditions intact. They didn't just become Romanized. They didn't just start worshiping Jupiter Capitolinus in Syria. They still kept their local traditions. And I think that was brilliant.
Here's a question having to do with whether it was just an embrace of multiculturalism, if you will, or whether a lot of these gods, they were not as separate as they may seem to be at first, because there are many gods that you could say share the same origin, whether we're talking about the Sumerian god Enlil being like Zeus, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So would you say that even with this pantheon of the Arabian gods, they are like the separated branches still of the same tree as a lot of these other gods originate from?
So there's two ways to look at this, because there's the historians and philosophers, for example. They're always trying to do what's called Greco-interpretatio or Romano-interpretatio. So if it's the Latin gods, they'll say, oh, Jupiter, yeah, he's just like Baal, basically. They'll compare him, and they'll do that. But it stops right there. You don't go to a temple in Rome and they change the name to Baal in Rome. You don't go to a temple in Phoenicia and they have, oh, he's Jupiter now. Like, they don't do that. They don't necessarily change anything. They're just kind of lending an olive branch and saying, our God's like your God, and it stops there. But the local traditions prevail. Baal is worshipped all the way until in the late 300s. There's worship of Isis and Osiris all the way up until
300 BC or
300 AD.
AD, wow.
Yeah, all the way into the 4th century until Theodosius. That's like the pagans didn't lose because they got defeated by arguments or anything. They got defeated because they became illegal from Theodosius, the Edict of Theodosius in 379, I think it is, 379 AD. Don't quote me on that. You can look it up.
It's amazing to think that at the time that Hagia Sophia, the big cathedral in Constantinople, was built, that city was still populated by a significant number of pagans.
Mostly pagans.
I don't know what the exact percentages are, but this enormous, the greatest, still perhaps arguably the greatest church ever made in Christian history, made so early in Christian history, at a time when a lot of the people, the taxes paying for it, were coming from people who still worship Zeus.
When Constantine converted to Christianity, the estimates are 5 to 10% Christian was the Roman Empire. So Theodosius is like half a century later, 40, 50 years later after that. And so you got to think, at that point in time, they probably did grow to some extent, but I don't think they're more than 50% by then at all. I think the majority of Romans, even when Theodosius makes the decree that no more are these pagan sites getting any more funding, no more are they even legalized. That point in time, people were still mostly pagans. So I just want to put this little side note from what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I just want
especially out in the countryside, because even in the city, the Christians, as Tacitus said at the time, Christianity was an urban cult. It was really big with the urbanites, and
kind of reminds me of something right now in the urban environment.
Yeah, and it wasn't just peasants rebelling against the aristocracy, although there was an element of that. It was initially like lower class immigrant stock people who were picking up, but in the 4th century, there were a significant number of, the children of pagan aristocrats got into the woke cult of the time. So it was like literally rich kids were like really into it. And they were like the ones who made it possible for an emperor like Constantine to take the stage, because
it's like your typical university liberals that are getting all the downtrodden to rally around them and saying, you're the victim here. You guys are the ones. It was like that same atmosphere that you get today was like how the Christians were in the 4th century. Very much similar to that, very much akin to that. So you have all these Oriental cults existing within a sort of a globalist empire. I mean, they're just trying to expand as much as possible, but they're keeping their local traditions alive, and they're not being told what to do, who to worship, how to do this, what to do that. And I think that's, I don't think we can copy that model today at all, but I think there's things we can take from it. And as you go forward, other things the Christians did well in as far as getting the dominance over the religious culture. One of the things that I noticed in my research is they got a monopoly on burial of the dead. So pagans in the 4th century, when somebody would die, there were only people that were around that were in control of catacombs and burial of the dead was Christians for some reason. I don't know what happened to the pagans that were before, their predecessors that were used to do that, because it might have to do with them. They like to burn. They like to do like.
Did they outlaw cremation in?
They did for a while. They did for a while. They legalized it. The Catholic Church legalized it much later, in like the later medieval period. But they did. That was one of the things that became illegal was cremation. That might be why the Christians started dominating burial services, because pagans were cremating, Christians were burying. Anyways, long story short, that was one of the things they were doing. Another thing they were doing was they were taking advantage of old rundown pagan temples and making them into churches.
And stealing stones from them to make churches as well. They were stealing a lot of masonry.
And I think I mentioned this last time we were talking, but I'll mention it again. This is really important. Was Pope Gregory 605 or something like that, 605 AD? He writes a letter to the bishop in London. And the bishop in London was like, what do we do with all these pagan sites? These people are pagans out here. What do we do? He's like, don't worry about it. This is what Pope Gregory says in his. It's in the.
Yeah, this is Bede's. Anglo-Saxon pagans he's referring to.
Yeah. It's in the Bede's recordings, the Chronicles of Bede, and he says, just go into the temple, take the idol out, put a cross in there, sprinkle holy water on it, and then let the pagans do what they do.
Yeah, he tried to keep some continuity, because the peasantry are used to going to a certain place for their religious worship, and so he was encouraging the missionaries and whatnot to keep some continuity, religious continuity, so it'd be easier for the Anglo-Saxons to transition.
Which I think is a genius move, which should be copied. So now in this day and age, there's I don't know where I'm at least. Even in New York, where I was from before I came here in Florida, there's tons of old Catholic churches that are no more being used anymore. They're just rotting.
The only temple to Odin in England is a converted Tudor era church, 500-year-old church, and it's in Newark, and it's run by a charity called the Odinist Fellowship.
And I'm sure it's a nicely built brick building, right?
It's a lovely old church, a little chapel. It's a small chapel, and it was not being used. It was up for sale. And that charity is looking to purchase churches. They believe, and there's a lot of people within the heathen community don't agree that we should worship in churches, but they believe that charity that they should use these derelict churches and preserve them and keep these lovely buildings for the worship of the native gods, which is nice, I think.
Well, a quick question regarding that. I've been seeing posts about these people who say that they're pagan and they wear that T-shaped symbol sometimes. What is that symbol called?
That's the Hammer of Thor.
The Hammer of Thor, thank you.
It's called Mjolnir.
But at the same time, these people say that they're anti-racist, anti-fascist, like they make a big show of being quite woke, and a lot of them don't really seem to be in good shape either, yet they're attracted for some reason to this particular thing. What do you think is going on specifically with those people? And do you know like who I'm talking about here? Is this like a very specific... Yes.
I know precisely what you're talking about. Look, there's a natural human desire for religion, but the current of the time is such that people they want firstly to have the idea of belonging to like a sort of, the ideological club that religion provides, which is what woke can actually provide. But one thing woke doesn't provide is another aspect of religion, which is the metaphysical stuff. So some woke people looking for some way to preserve they don't want to be heretics from the state religion, which is, or the prevailing religion of our time, which is not Christianity anymore, it's woke. But they want to remain woke, but they want to have a religion which allows them to do all kinds of things that the majority of religions forbid. And so sometimes they'll try and twist Christianity to make it accepting of their unconventional sexual preferences, or other times they'll say, I'm a pagan, believing quite in error that paganism allowed people to do whatever they liked.
Right, which is not true at all.
Not true at all, no.
Wait. So you're saying Odin wasn't a transsexual?
No, and I think, to say that about someone is like basically... That's a murder. That's a killable offense. If you accuse someone, and I'm not just saying that like I'm guessing. I mean, literally, there's legal precedence. If you accuse someone of, in Njál Saga, Flosi receives a garment, a piece of silk, as a gift, and then people say it's not like a dress or anything, just a piece of silk as like an exotic thing, and then people say you received the gift of an effeminate garment, and then he's got to kill people to compensate for that. So you can't, it's been described as the most homophobic culture to ever exist. If someone calls you gay, and that was a standard way, calling someone gay is a standard way to start a blood feud. And that means that they're then justified in maybe killing you or your brother or your father, someone from your kinship network, and not a woman, because that's outside their honor culture. You can't strike and hit women. You can't, even hitting your own wife is grounds for divorce and is shameful. But, Muslims think it's perfectly fine to hit wife. But if someone calls you gay, you've got to kill someone from their side has got to go down. Basically, really, really very, very important. So the idea that Odin is a tranny or gay is completely unfounded. And it's been debunked, but the actual theory doesn't come just from these crazy, like woke, weird, fat people. It actually comes from some academics who were reaching a bit further beyond the sources would actually justify. So there is an accusation.
That happens a lot too.
Yeah, they do that a lot because it's more. They'll get more public, more funding. If you say the right things, you get funding in academia. That's how it works. But look in Lucasena, the evil god Loki, he accuses he is guilty of ergi, which is basically like sexual shame. Ergi or nith. If you're nith, then you're ergi. And nith is shame, but of a sexual nature. And ergi can mean like, it could be translated as a slur against homosexuals, like some word like that. But also it encompasses more than just being gay. It also encompasses cowardice and unmanliness in general, which encompasses homosexuality, weakness and cowardice in battle all together as one thing. They don't have a separate category for homosexuality. It's all one group of shameful, unmasculine attributes.
But would you say this is different from like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where, from what I understand, they did have even regiments of men, who had these younger men who were their lovers, and it tied them together when they were going into battle?
Well, that's another topic, but that to what extent they accepted homosexuality in Greece and Rome, they were certainly hyper-masculine cultures as well, and they valued masculinity as well.
Yeah, so it's not like today where like that. Okay, that type of stuff was a lot more prominent in the sources for sure. However, it wasn't like this fully. Everyone goes a little too far when they say, "Oh, look, I found a source where there's a philosopher and his beloved, and they're engaging in something, whatever." You might find a primary source, and there's tons of sources that do say that. But that doesn't mean that there are other sources that condemn it. Like Plato hated that stuff. Aristotle hated that stuff. I would say it's more like today where some people accepted it, but a lot of people don't accept it still. Not like it was like rampantly a thing. Like it was still a vice is what I'm trying to get at.
The guy Loki, the bad god, he is guilty of homosexual stuff, getting taken up the arse by a horse. So, or not, he actually transformed into a female horse. So it's
I remember reading that once, yeah.
Yeah, but that's extremely shameful. And when he's being, taken to task for this, he's throwing out insults back, and he throws an insult out at Odin that he did something effeminate, which is basically referring to a type of magic that Odin practiced on the island of Samsey, which is certain types of magic are associated with women, and therefore by grouping this within the category of effeminate behaviors, it then associates him with other things. But he is there's a reply, and Odin is defended. So and it's not really an accurate thing. And we know that what Odin was doing in Samsey, the magic he was doing was for the so that he could rape a woman. So it's not gay. He was specifically trying to rape a woman so that he could produce an heir, a specific heir who would be capable of taking revenge for him. So it was all part of a plan, a divine plan, and it was nothing to do with being gay. So that idea that he is attaching that kind of shame to the highest God is extremely blasphemous and not acceptable within our religion.
And as far as the Zeus and Ganymede thing, that was very much one of the aspects of mythology that people frowned upon. They didn't look at it and go, "Oh, Zeus and Ganymede, that's so awesome." They were like, "Can you believe that Zeus did that to Ganymede?" So it wasn't something that was talked about in a positive way.
But then the question has to do with the outliers of society, which have always existed, whether we're talking about, certain tantric forms of the Advaita Vedanta, / Hinduism. There are people who went beyond whatever was considered to be permissible in society in order to have some kind of a transformative experience. And there are all of these, occult, esoteric practices that do have something in common with the idea of transcending certain binaries like male and female. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that now you have to, put on lipstick, go into a store and demand that people call you ma'am. But there does seem to be a resurgence of trad thinking that completely disagrees with any of this stuff.
I also think that gets misunderstood too, because that's more about the oneness of Brahman. So the oneness of Brahman being not male or female, being completely disattached from all physical, from all desires. I don't think it's a sexual thing at all. It's more of just being detached and being part of the one.
I would argue everything is sexual, but there are different aspects to sexuality. So, for example, the primal energy, Kundalini, that animates the universe within Hinduism, that is also sexual. And as we talked with Jason Giorgiani back when you were in New York, the thing that was worshipped by Socrates was Eros. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this isn't just some pedestrian, woke thing that, they're just obsessed with sex and, fur suits and things like that. There is an aspect to sexuality, even maybe things that are a little bit more devious within the world of sexuality that hold amazing power. Now, as far as finding out, how can you channel that into a good direction as opposed to just, wasting one's energy on frivolous things, I don't know. But I'm curious what you guys think.
There's also another thing that sort of tangential but relevant here is that what the behavior of the gods in myths is not always exemplary. Rather, the myth itself is supposed to communicate some divine truth to you, and that may include the behavior of gods that the gods aren't beholden to the same rules as mortals anyway. But, when Zeus is going around raping things, people, men and women, it's not saying that that's what you have to go and do. It's not like it's not like a simple watch and learn and copy from your master kind of lesson.
In a way, I see what you're saying. The counter argument would be that sometimes people root for... No, I'd say most times people root for Scarface, Tony Montana, when they're watching that movie. They are rooting for the bad guy, even though they are portrayed to be bad guys. And it's very explicit to say, don't do what this person is doing. Look, he ended up in misery and all of that. But there's still an element of attractiveness there. So that may be one of the reasons why you had Plato, who was going against these, rapping... how Giorgiani phrased it, like these ancient Greeks, they were almost like rapping when they were talking about these stories in this internal system of the internet that they had between each other. Because from what I understand, Neil, the Iliad and the Odyssey and all of these Homeric stories, it wasn't just a story. it was a system for understanding reality,
Right.
all the way to like, how do you build a ship? How do you construct society? So I am
It's
kind
also
of
a geography text. It
Yeah.
mentions all the cities and where they are and how to get there. It's also a text that mentions all the different clans and who they are and where their families come from. In a way, it was the what we would think of as the internet today. It was the source of all knowledge.
Yeah.
Going and not reading it, listening to the bard perform it and hear the music. Hear it. It's hexameter prose. It's performed. You memorize it that way. It becomes a part of your culture, and that's the whole point of religion. The whole point of religion is to follow a structured lifestyle, to become something that might not naturally have those things, but it gives you structure. It puts you into a position where you have to follow something.
But then would you guys say that Plato was wrong in how he was analyzing these Homeric texts and how he wanted to get away from that into something, more perfect, if you will, which ended up creating something like Christianity, indirectly, you could say?
I personally think that the Platonist thinkers, who, including Emperor Julian, who determined that there were hidden truths within the myths, were correct. Not all of the and what the reasoning was that whenever you see a myth where the apparent behavior of the gods is questionable, that is where you should be most vigilant for a hidden meaning.
And I think Plato, as far as Plato, like going against the grain and talking, basically shaming Homer and Hesiod and some of the playwriters that came before him. I think he made some mistakes on Book 2 of Republic, for example, that particular book. If you've never read Plato's Republic, Book 2, he particularly goes super hard against Homer and Hesiod. It says that these books should be taken away from all public education. Heraclitus was one of these people who says that Homer and all the bards need to, I think he said something along the lines of the Dionysian cults are shameful. They cleanse themselves in mud like an animal. So these philosopher type of people where they wanted to tear down and replace what the culture, and they successfully did that. The problem is, I think they saw what ended up happening a few centuries later. I think they might have changed a little bit on their tone a little bit.
Yeah.
So basically, I think if they would have saw how everything played out, because people really did pay attention to what they were saying, and the culture did get torn down and it did get replaced by something more akin to the things they were pushing in a sense. It's like, for example, Plato in Republic, same book. He sort of fantasizes about having a system in place where there's a priesthood that's allowed to lie, that is the guardians of the text. Yeah, the guardians of the text, basically, where children are raised thinking that they are going to another place when they die and everyone else is going to Hades, that there's a special place reserved for them, that they need to be taught that they are of a special, and that's sort of what the Judeo-Christians adopt, that type of mindset where there's heaven for us.
Who was it who said Christianity is Platonism for the masses?
Nietzsche. He's absolutely right. Nietzsche was actually saying Plato was to blame for most of this stuff. He actually says that a lot in different parts of his writings. However, before I go too hard on Plato and Heraclitus and all them, I do think that a lot of the stuff that they were criticizing was legit, and they were sort of entering into a new, there was some things that needed to be said, that needed to be thrown into the mix, if you will, for culture, that did make it. And the Neoplatonists, the Middle Platonists, Plutarch and Iamblichus, and you read those guys, and you can see that's they were trying to hold it. I think Mithraism as a religion. This is, I'll shut up after this. I've said a lot here. I think Mithraism as a religion was honestly the most ideal cult, if you will, that if that was the religion that would have been the sort of Western religion rather than Christianity, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. I don't think Nietzsche would ever have written God is dead. I think religion would be alive and well right now with that being.
But Mithraism could never be what Christianity became unless it transformed into something else, because Mithraism was a mystery cult.
Yeah.
And the Christianity rose in the late Roman Empire with those other mystery cults, were all in fashion. But the one thing different from Christianity is that it was a mystery cult where the mystery wasn't really a mystery, because everyone was allowed to know it.
I guess what I meant to say is Julian's cult, the public.
Oh, the late Platonism,
Sol Invictus, Platonism, Neoplatonism religion with the divine mysteries for those who want more.
The elite.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would have been esotericism, but I mean, it's not really a massive part of Christianity. It doesn't matter.
Just so we understand a little bit more, because you said mystery cult, I want to make sure I don't skip over this. So just aside for a second here, when we have things like Saturnalia, that festival where it was both slaves and the elites that were taking part in it, that wasn't like an exclusive group of elites that were the only ones that were allowed to enter into this cult. So how many people are we dealing with here, and how woke, in a good way, would you say that they got through this process?
Well, basically, the normal state religion of Rome of the Roman Empire was pretty much the same as the religion of the Roman Republic. It was the gods, and with the Pontifex Maximus, the emperor holding like the high priesthood title, and many of the old things like the cults of Mars, the cults of the October horse, and Jupiter being the main god, and all this stuff. And of course, very importantly for Romans specifically, not part of Greek religion, but the cult of the Vestal Virgins, which was essential for the heart of Rome itself. In the Roman Empire, late antiquity, there was a lot of immigrants in Rome, and it wasn't the same stock anymore. And there was a great diversity of beliefs and things, changing a lot, and a lot of literate people in the cities, all with different ideas. And what became really popular was these mystery cults, often with a soteriological aspect. That means they offer salvation, something that the old pagan religion wasn't about so much. It may have had some promises of a better afterlife for certain people, but these soteriological philosophies or religions were all about, you can, through this path, I'll teach you. It's like a pyramid scheme or something. You get up to the top, and you get to know, you're going to learn the real way. I guess a precedent, actually, more than part of it. The Eleusinian mysteries in Greece could be something like that, where there's this, you're not allowed to talk about the Eleusinian mysteries.
Right. I think they started the whole mystery movement, I think.
It's like Fight Club.
It's basically like Fight Club. It's very similar, because those guys in Fight Club, they're not satisfied with their lives, and they're looking for something to make them separate and different from the people around them. And that's kind of what was going on with these mystery cults. The Mithraism was a big one, but mostly were guys who had served in the Roman army going around. So it was Christianity also spread to a certain degree through the Roman army as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there was lots of stuff like that, and a lot of them were non-European origin. Some of them came from the Middle East or whatever.
It's almost like theosophy in a way, because the theosophists were very fascinated by these, ascended masters from the East. So in a way we could say, well, what's new? It keeps repeating. But I do want to be devil's advocate for a second and say that when it comes to these mystery cults, sure, you could say that some of them were pyramid schemes, like the Scientology of their day. But then there were also others when it comes to people like Pythagoras, for instance, like people who we can take a look at as inspiring the philosophy that ended up changing the world, that ended up changing people's reality.
The real Pythagoras, to what extent we know about him, we only know about him from much later sources talking about the life of Pythagoras and stuff, mostly Platonists. But he is nothing to do with the mystery cult phenomenon in the late Roman Empire. I'm not.
No, I'm not saying he is, but I'm just giving an example of there being certain mystery cults that did hold a lot of weight as far as how fundamental they were to altering people's reality, and that there may be something to that idea of transcending beyond the cycles of history that a lot of these were able to tap into. You could say accessing certain inner technologies, if you will.
The Pythagoreans, for example, named after Pythagoras, was a good example of a cult that gave a very strict lifestyle. There was foods that were abolished. There was certain things you had to do. At dawn you had to get up and do. That's a perfect example of religion, as some sort of prescribed ritualistic religion. that didn't necessarily exist in just one city either. So it sort of was like one of their first like international. I don't know if that's a good word to use, but like outside of just one city religion that existed in multiple cities, where you had people under calling themselves Pythagoreans and even later Neo-Pythagoreans who followed strict religious guidelines.
And some of those guidelines are in the cult of Orpheus as well later on. It's influenced by it. No one's certain. I mean, even the people practicing in antiquity weren't really sure about the origins of Pythagorean beliefs. Some people thought it came from Egypt. Some people thought it came from the Chaldeans. And there was not really certain. And some people also noted that some of the core doctrines of Pythagorean philosophy, such as metempsychosis or whatever you call it, reincarnation, were present in many other peoples, like the Celts, and they weren't sure if Pythagoras got them from the Celts or the Celts got them from Pythagoras. In reality, I think a lot of these things were quite perennial. Like reincarnation is found in some form in Germanic, Slavic, Celtic. All religions in Europe probably had some.
Even Judaism, by the way, the Jews within their mysticism have the concept of Gilgul. So they don't really talk about it that much because probably it would sound really weird to a lot of, especially to a lot of Christians. But there is definitely something to these mystery cults, I think, where sure, like some of them could just be scams. They just want your money. Maybe some of them just want to take your wife or whatever. But at the same time, there does seem to be this battle that goes on between the exoteric and the esoteric, where you would have people who would say we have to return to tradition, and whatever these Satanists, these devil worshippers, the Freemasons or whatever they're doing is like diabolical and they want to destroy the world. And who knows, maybe some of them do, but what do you think is the proper relationship between the esoteric and the exoteric? Would it be possible for there to be people who would be responsible in how they enter into these mystery cults? And do you see a reason for these mystery cults to exist in the first place? Like, is there some, you could say, higher calling for some people towards them, which actually does benefit society or even benefits their own personal transformation, as opposed to just being some time-wasting ripoff?
My opinion is that, well, you can see from the success of Christianity that there was something problems in polytheistic religions that preceded it around Europe, that they didn't cater to a certain type of person, and that sort of person is quite commonly encountered. And some of the late rebellions, successful, well, not ultimately successful, but somewhat successful attempts to counter the rise of Christianity by people like Emperor Julian, and also up in Scandinavia, Håkon Jarl, who tried to revive the pagan religions, but realized that there needed to be this two-tiered system. So Julian had, he was raised a Christian, but he was familiar with Platonism and the Platonic, mystery, or like the esoteric aspects of myth. So he understands myths having different tiers of meaning to different types of people. And so he was trying to preserve, he was really a Iamblican form of Platonism. And Iamblichus had this idea that he believed in like the traditional version of paganism, where it was like, just a simple make the sacrifices for the gods, and that's fine for them. But then there was another tier, which is more in line with Platonic philosophy. So he was trying to have his cake and eat it. So you have both the traditional form of paganism and Platonic version combined, and that was Julian's idea, and I think it would have worked better if he'd implemented it more effectively, but he had some administrative issues with the way he tried to enforce it. And similarly, up in Scandinavia, when the Christian of Denmark was trying to enforce Christianity, Earl Håkon Jarl decided to revive the pagan religion, despite him being an Odinist, an Odinic follower and a descendant of Odin, according to his sacred genealogy. He specifically made a revived version that focused more on the cult of Thor, because Thor was the most popular god among the peasants in Trondheim, where he ruled. So this populist version of paganism that he needed to use to counter the encroachment of Christianity gave something a bit more like credence to the peasant cults. And he recognized that their version of paganism was important in order to make paganism a potent counterforce to Christianity.
But would you also say that that pagan force was imbued inside of Christianity in more of this esoteric way when it comes to certain Christian traditions, especially when we're talking about the Catholic Mass and things of that nature, where maybe the pagans tried to preserve their traditions within Christianity as a mystery within, in order for it to come out at a certain time? So you could say, like in the Renaissance, it ended up coming out. How much would you attribute the Christian religion to having these aspects of paganism within it? As
it certainly has influences from paganism at different stages in its development. So even before Christ is born, there's already some elements of different Semitic paganism and other forms of paganism in the Middle East taken on into Judaism, Temple Judaism, and then later Christianity is, of course, a Roman religion. So there are Roman influences on the architecture, in the structures of the Mass. Loads of this. I don't think anyone denies that those are there.
Justin Martyr noticed it too. Justin Martyr writes about how the Mass, he says that the Mithraic Mass was a demonic copying of the Christian Mass.
Yeah, and you were saying, Neil, that the title Pontifex Maximus, that was the title. The title for the Catholic priest. And now we had Elon Musk quite recently calling himself Caecius Maximus for a short while there, also talking about like the Egyptian god Kek, the chaos god. And it is interesting, by the way, like how a lot of these horrible events had transpired like right after that, as far as like the Elon Musk's vehicle, the Cybertruck, blowing up right in front of Trump Tower. While he had that whole Caecius Maximus.
I was saying to you, if this was back in the day, the augurs would have said that's a bad omen right there. Just seeing that image like that, that's how you're supposed to read you're supposed to read nature around you to get signs. I'm just saying that would have been a bad omen. But so, I did cut Tom off though. Tom, what were you saying? I don't mean to cut you. You were saying something about
what was I talking
paganism,
about?
influence on Christianity.
Oh yeah. So it's definitely, there's no doubt that there's Roman pagan influences, but as it spread out into the former provinces of the Roman Empire and even to the regions where the Romans never lived, such as Germania, Scandinavia, while it's true that some of the old pagan folk customs were integrated into the Christian calendar, such as Yule, it isn't really true that the Christian religion was significantly influenced by Slavic or Germanic paganism or Celtic paganism. And some people claim it is, and there's a whole book called The Germanization of Christianity, but I don't think it's really true. Most of the paganism that you can find in Christianity was already implemented before Constantine or just around that time. So I don't think subsequently a lot. I mean, for people like me from the more northern parts of Europe, it's not really that much relevant to my form of paganism anyway, and it doesn't help me connect with England at all, or to the religion of my ancestors. But yeah, it definitely has elements of paganism in it.
What do you make, Tom, of the founding fathers of the United States, who did come from British stock? They were raised, you could say, in the British style, yet they ended up embracing, like George Washington, he served in the British Army, obviously, before he became
Somerset stock.
So when it comes to their beliefs, though, George Washington himself was a Freemason, as well as other founding fathers. What do you make of their worldview when it came to, I know that they were deists, but they also embraced a lot of things that you could say do go back to this more paganistic, ancient Roman mindset. What do you think is going on there, and how do you think it relates to Christianity, as well?
Well, the 18th century was a crazy time, and the people that in those days had all kinds of crazy beliefs. And it was like a radical, extreme radical time. This is what the French Revolution comes out of, the American Revolution comes out of, the Gordon riots in London. And a lot of it, it's like the previous century, the 17th century, had been all about the radical Protestants, the Puritans who wanted to make no fun at all, and kind of going against, like the Renaissance, where there'd been a sort of revival of paganism and everything. So it's kind of like two, the Western mind had been split in two. One is this Old Testament, no fun at all, Germanic people LARPing as Jews, and the other is the South, more like the southern parts of Europe, trying to get in touch with the old Roman paganism in another sense. And these two different currents were big in the West. And I think in the 18th century, this kind of chaotic mix of those two opposing elements was sort of resulting in all kinds of things like the rise of deism and Freemasonry and stuff like that. And all of that, like also the whole ideas of like liberalism come out of that. The ideas of like building of like Western, what we now think of as the weirdness of the West. It all comes out of that crazy time. And like that was a time when you could be a Freemason. And that's why they were suddenly talking about rebuilding Solomon's temple while also like trying to mix in some Roman pagan stuff and some weird stuff here. And like this was a crazy time. But at the same time, Jefferson spoke Anglo-Saxon, and he wanted to have the proposed seal for the United States to have Hengist and Horsa, the grandsons of Woden, on the seal. But another one proposed was Moses. So these are different currents at the same time. There's different parts of America. America was settled by Puritans. It was also settled by Freemasons and radicals and things like that. And all these people had different ideas about what America was supposed to be. And they were kind of coming together and making it, a compromise.
I think Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma, is a good window into that mindset of the, well, he's 19th century, but he's right after that, it's a good window into that sort of mindset where it's almost like New Ageism, but it's not, it's Freemasonry actually, but yeah.
But when it comes to this mindset, if I imagine the world itself as like one giant brain, it almost seems like the right brain versus left brain having this sort of dialogue and coming up with something, because you could say that Christianity, like that part of it was much more orderly, much more, you could say, focused on, mathematics and logic and things like that. They came out of this much more organized Christian society, but then you probably had people who were interested in the deep sexual orgiastic aspects of life, but wanted to do it in a more, you could say, controlled way, because they weren't just like, wild, savage people that were having an orgy. Like, they may have seen this darker aspect of humanity and wanted to figure out, how do we balance these two forces together in a way that it works? Now, ironically, in the United States, per the thread that we had in our group chat over there is this aspect of now African culture that is within the U.S. that is added on top of all of this. And I'm curious, what do you guys see that has transpired there? And where exactly is this going? Is this like a fusion of the more tribal societies in Africa influencing the United States, along with the aforementioned Christianity and this pagan belief as well? Like, what do you see happening here?
Well, there's no doubt that besides, like at the beginning, Neil was saying how language affects the way you think. It's not just your race, but your language. And, genes affect your behavior for sure, but culture does too. What is culture? It's things like language, it's things like religion, but also it's exposure to people, basically. What are the people around you doing? Your language, what we know throughout history is that people speak more like the people they speak to than the people that they don't speak to. And people behave more like the people that they interact with than the people that they don't interact with. So, of course, if you live in a culture that is adjacent to another culture, then those two cultures will be affected by one another. So the Americans going through that decision to have African slaves, set themselves down a path where they would be, to some extent, Africanized. And I'm not talking about the people who are mixed with Africans. I'm talking about, the average. It's interesting, the asymmetric mixing in the United States. The average person who identifies as white in the United States is less than 1% African. So basically not African. But the average person who identifies as black is around, I think, 40% European. And people can be as little as 25% black and still identify as black in the United States. But they don't, it's not the other way around. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, there is a cultural thing where I think Americans have a fondness for the African American. And white Americans have a certain fondness, not just there's resentment and racism as well, but there's also a certain fondness where I see them,
It's always been this way.
Yeah.
Like you go back to music from the 1920s and you can see how black music is influencing white music. Even back as 100 years ago.
There's like a free-spiritedness about this kind of, like jazz, for example. There's a lot of improvisation within jazz, and there's this feeling of not being restricted to being within a certain order, and how there is this natural sense of rhythm that starts to come about. And a lot of Jewish people, by the way, also became some of the greatest jazz musicians. Yeah. So it's interesting how you have, like, in this urban environment, this thing happen. But I would say, though, that I'm not sure that a lot of the people from that jazz culture, and especially the people who came from the post-slavery Christian culture, would see what's happening right now with hip-hop and enjoy that very much. Like, I don't think they would see that as their...
I think you have a point there. But and at the same time, though, I agree with you on that. But at the same time, though, you can trace back the lineage of some of black music today, and you might end up in some Yoruba religion in South Africa somewhere, like because there is a lineage there, and black music does have a spirit to it. And there you were watching that clip you showed me before we started. I don't know if you want to play it or not for your audience, but you can see that there's a spirit in the room that everyone's sort of tuned into.
Yes,
which is what the ancient Greeks were big on music. In their culture, in their worship, at the Eleusinian mysteries, at the Phrygian mysteries, they did dithyrambs in honor of Bacchus, paeans in honor of Apollo. That type music is big for spirituality. But in the club scene, you can have people all jamming out to a song, and they're being possessed by a spirit in that moment.
Yes, I think so. Plato warned of the dangers of music in that respect, and I certainly think that I do think that people over exaggerate the extent to which African versus European music influence things like the blues and rock and roll. Because if you listen to like English folk music from the 19th and 18th century, you can hear, and in Irish folk music, you can hear it's basically like hillbilly and rockabilly. That comes from European music more than African. African music, not actually that easy to hear in early blues and rock and roll. If you listen to African and compare it to European folk, and gospel comes from European gospel music, English specifically. But there is certain things, especially when you see with the dancing and with the freestyle jazz in that time, and also, and you look at charismatic Christianity, which is of a specifically American sort in black churches and in some white churches, and when they're taken by the Spirit of the Lord, and they're doing this quite exaggerated things. You don't see that in Europe, and that does remind me very much of the sort of things you see in like West African tribal cultures.
Yoruba,
yeah. But then the question of something like twerking, for instance, which I don't think a lot of the grandmothers, wearing their nice looking crowns, for a Sunday church would approve of. They'd look down on a lot of the twerking that's going on. But twerking does seem obviously incredibly sexual, but it also seems like something I could imagine going on in some tribe that's trying to get in touch with this power of Eros, like in this very obvious way of gyrating their butts.
Well, the Jamaicans, a parallel development in Jamaica, which is obviously the same West African stock mixed with the same sort of British stock, but in a completely different country. And they have daggering, which is a sort of overtly sexual form of dancing that they like doing, which is quite a bit like twerking, but it just shows that there is a certain tendency among that people for that kind of dance. I think they enjoy that sort of dancing, that sort of behavior more than Europeans do. So they're more prone to it.
And Rudolf Steiner, the theosophist philosopher, he was also very critical even of jazz, because he believed that would bring on, very chaotic spirits. And there does seem to be this battle between order and chaos, and how much of each people want to embrace.
I wanted to push back on the orgiastic cult thing. I think there's a misconception with that through the Christianization. Like for Clement of Alexandria, I think is the reason why we look at Bacchic religion as orgiastic when it's not. And I'll just prove it to you right now. Can I share my screen real quick?
Absolutely.
All right, this is from Revelation, and there's a reason why I'm showing you this. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
All All right, and this is the English as which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire. But the Greek here says akratou and tu potrio tes orges autu kai basanastestetai. But here's this word right here, orges. That's the word orgy. That's where we get the word orgy from. Now, why doesn't it say in the full strength of the cup of his orgy? Why doesn't it say that? Well, it's because it's the word for rage. So when we're looking at the ancient sources from Euripides, Bacchae, or whatever it is, whatever source you're reading, Plato talks about the orgiastic cults of Bacchus.
I thought orgy meant to be like carried by a spiritual force or something. Like
it's to rage. It's to be enraged. It's to rage out. And it doesn't necessarily mean orgy like the way we think of orgy today.
Well, it usually has sexual connotations, but I know it wasn't originally exclusively a sexual thing.
Exactly. And now, can there be a Bacchic rage where something sexual goes on? And maybe, yeah. That's not the primary word. That's what the word means. The word means it's a spiritual raging with music playing, and flutes playing, and drums playing, and everyone's probably intoxicated on a sacred drink, and it's all done by the behest of priests. And it's not just a wild orgy where everyone's just doing whatever they want. It's a specific tradition involving raging. Now, Clement of Alexandria in the early 3rd century, like right around 200 AD, he makes this scathing critique of the Bacchic religion, and he's like, "Oh, in their orgies, they're having sex and doing all this crazy stuff," and he's not reporting the truth about what's really going on in these cults. So now the reason why I brought that up,
he cut off his own balls.
And exactly. So Christians are doing even
balls.
Crazier shit. Exactly. So that's a great point, by the way. But the point I'm trying to say is, don't let people give you the wrong idea about, these orgiastic pagans, they're all a bunch of orgy. That's all nonsense. That's not true. Pagans are very pious. The word pious, the Orphics are the ones who invented that word. So it's like Eusebius, that's the guy's name. Eusebius. That's a word from the pagans. It means good spirited. It means like be pious. Theosebes, God fearing. The word God fearing, you could find that in pagan sources from Homer and Hesiod, going way back before the Christians ever said God fearing. That's a pagan thing. So I want people to realize that when it comes to paganism versus Christianity, you're not choosing the pious versus the orgiastic. That's not true. It's just not true.
If I were to push back a little bit on your pushing back, I would ask where the line is between sex and rage. Because if we look at it a little bit more holistically here, when you go into some kind of a frenzy, some kind of a rage, there is something about it that is connected to having some kind of an orgasm, having something very intense happen to you. There is this aspect of intensity.
Yeah.
So,
and even with these more very archaic local traditions where they would have these sort of rage ceremonies, a lot of it was meant to have children for the next generation. It's in the middle of the winter time, and they would have these Dionysia fests midwinter, so that by the time spring rolls around, there's babies being born, and that's part of the culture. So there was a purpose to this. It wasn't just so people can do whatever they want, and they're all demonic and devil worshipping pagans. That's not what it was. This was a very much priestly ran, organized religion based for fertility reasons. It's how you keep your society alive.
No, that definitely makes sense. But as far as doing more than just keeping one society alive, when it comes to this world that you were describing of dying, reincarnating based on your ancestry, as well as the nature of the afterlife realm of you being with your ancestors, when it comes to this hodgepodge of ideas going around at the time of the founding fathers, if you were to take like a founding father, or even just like a random person who was just interested in, the spirit of the times. So somebody in the United States during the Revolutionary period who was interested, both in a lot of these pagan ideas as well as, a deistic interpretation of Christianity, where exactly would somebody like that end up in the afterlife?
Well, in my belief system, what you believe doesn't really determine your destination after death. It's what you do. So someone like like someone like George Washington, by all accounts, extremely charismatic. Everyone, even it was like the way people describe him is very similar to the way people described Buddha when he was alive. That even people who hated him, as soon as they met him, they fell under his power. He had such a charismatic ability, and obviously he's like a military leader and stuff like that.
And also very tall, by the way, very tall for the time.
He was a big and powerful. I think he was chosen as a spokesman for this revolutionary movement because people who met him realized that guy's got an aura. He's got a certain
Napoleon
something.
was like that too. Napoleon too.
Mm-hmm. Not as tall though, but yes.
But apparently Napoleon wasn't as short as many believe. But anyway,
true.
The point is that someone like that is naturally, if you know the etymology of the word charisma, it's like it does have a religious
grace.
Yeah, it's like it's something. It has like this. This is someone the gods love that kind of person.
Right. Exactly.
They love them. They're already beloved by the gods as soon as they're born. So the likelihood that they're going to end up somewhere close to the gods is high, or to be reborn again as someone else great is high.
Yeah, and that aligns with the ancient Greek belief of how you end up in you're like, well, you could get reincarnated, but you don't always do. Sometimes you can just get passed right along to where the gods are, and now you're in Elysium with the gods. So you're almost deified in a sense. But it has nothing to do with what they believed in or they chose the right path. No, it's the gods just love them. Period.
Even if they didn't know who the gods were, like could they have no understanding at all?
It depends. It depends on what they did and who they were. That's really what it comes down to.
If you don't know how to behave in the afterlife, you might end up. There was a certain belief in Germanic pagans. It seems that there was a concern with Christian ghosts. So when people started becoming Christian, there was a fear of the ghosts of the Christians. So they believed something to do with the way the Christians either believed or the way that they were treating the dead bodies. Maybe it was just because they didn't think the funeral rites were proper. They were very likely to become ghosts. And ghosts are like similar, like in Eastern religions, in Hinduism and Buddhism, you have the hungry ghost who is like a lost soul who didn't pass on to the next place as he should have done. So I think that they had that worry that the Christian rites and stuff weren't the proper way for people to pass on to next. So I'm not saying belief had I can't tell if it's beliefs or specifically the rituals, but something to do with Christianity was a concern in that respect. But also there are myths of Christians dying and going to Odin anyway, like Olaf Tryggvason, who was a big enemy of heathenism, destroyed idols, destroyed temples. But in a legend, you could say it was written by a Christian, but he goes anyway to Valhall because he killed so many people and he died in battle. So if you die in battle, then you go to Odin in Valhall. It doesn't matter. There's no other way to go. You can sacrifice to Odin all your life and pray to him every day, but then if you die in your bed, you don't go to him. And if you ignore him your whole life, but you die in battle, you go to him. It's got nothing to do with virtue. It's just like
it's just what the gods demand. That's just what the gods decree.
Yeah. So if you're an Eskimo, or if you're like a Japanese person and you die in battle, I don't know what kind of battles they had up in the North Pole. Maybe like against against like a walrus or something, or polar bear. But anyway, when you would die in battle, would you also go to Odin as these people who are incredibly far away from Odin? The Japanese, obviously they have Amaterasu, they have their own gods there, but what in that case?
Well, I believe in like the kind of doctrine of ancient perennial doctrine that was espoused by Celsus, which is basically that every pagan religion is the same religion in a different way, and it's just understood differently by different races. And because different people have experienced the divine in different ways, and those traditions that they've inherited from their ancestors are the correct way for them to engage with the divine. So I don't know how a Japanese person would understand the passing of the soul of the dead. The Japanese religion of Shinto has been heavily influenced by Indian traditions now, because of Buddhism, but they have their way. I don't concern myself with what a foreigner would do, but from my perspective, a samurai who died in battle would go to Odin, but they wouldn't experience it that way themselves because they're not Germanic.
There is something that I am curious about having to do with a recent dream that I had. You could say this is like one of those visionary dreams that people sometimes have, where I was encountering something that told me about the nature of the afterlife realm. I encountered this alien, you could say, who gave me this suitcase, inside of which there were also these really delicious bars of chocolate, which I really appreciate, but also there was this pamphlet, you could say, like all these papers that were stacked together, and they had various strange looking illustrations inside of them, like showing some kind of like esoteric things having to do with nature of reality. But likewise, there was something within this text that told me the nature of the afterlife realm is one where whatever experiences we have in our mind, that, you know, we may feel a certain way if somebody insults us or if we think of something pleasant, we experience it to a certain extent in this realm where it does affect how we talk with other people, whether we're frowning, whether we're happy. It affects our heart rate. But this alien told me that in the spirit world, this is intensified to a great extent, where you not only think it and feel it, but you experience it in terms of the things that are going on around you. The world that you're inhabiting is primarily based on this state that you are in, and that determines the things that you experience in the afterlife. So I'm curious what you guys think of that, because that may also explain how in certain heavenly realms or hellish realms, people would encounter things that look like the things that they were raised to believe they would encounter, as well as how they feel during that time. Those would be the masks that the gods would wear for people who would go into those realms. So somebody Japanese would see things that are more related to their culture, and so on and so forth.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that basically I've said this to people as well, like the myths that I read about and I explain to Germanic heathens, like if you go, we believe that everyone goes to hell first to be judged, and then they go over the rivers, and then they're, of the underworld, and they will be allocated to a hall, which is fit for them, and there are different halls associated with different gods and different people, and also some halls for punishment for those who have misbehaved. So the way that you live in life affects the destination of the soul, or the afterlife. We don't know if you say soul, but the thing I try to explain to people is that you won't expect a hall to look like a 10th century Viking hall, because obviously in the 1st century they had a different type of hall, didn't they? So did they go to a 10th century style Viking hall? Or like, obviously you'll see something that looks more like maybe a pub, or if you're like an Englishman like me, it'll resemble a pub. And I experienced dreams of the sort you've had, and I visited the other places, but they don't look like fantastical places. They look like places that you've been in your life, your pubs or whatever that you spend time in, but you can identify them as the other world from certain signs that you can learn about through mythology.
It's also similar, by the way, in The Sopranos, great series if you guys haven't seen it. One of the characters in The Sopranos has this near-death experience, and when he's lying in the hospital, he tells Tony, he's like an Italian mobster, that he was in hell, but hell was an Irish pub. And it was like full of like Irishmen, and also some like Roman, ancient Roman soldiers, and so on and so forth. And
there's some Roman paganism in The Sopranos, because he buries a cake. Yeah. He buries a birthday cake for his wife, which is burying a cake for the dead is a Roman pagan thing, isn't it?
Very interesting. But another interesting aspect of this, which you just reminded me of, there was this guy on the show, Aryan Cowboy. He came in, back in the day when BTR first started. I have no idea where this guy is right now. Very interesting guy. Maybe he'll hopefully return one day. But anyway, he was talking about how when he was having these not necessarily dreams, but when like astral projections, when he was astrally projecting, he went into this world, and again, take it with a grain of salt, he could be making this whole thing up, but I just found it very interesting how he was describing this state, where he was in this place where cells were being generated, like these structures were being built out of these cells by these Clockwork Elf-like machines, but also he was encountering somebody who looked to him like a moth, and he was seen by this person to be a stump. The point is that the avatar of the other person that somebody else may see, whether it's their family member or whatever, is based on their own projections. So if you are within your world in the heavenly realm, you may not necessarily see the other person as they see themselves or as they see you. And I find that to be extremely interesting, how much these masks that may be worn by the gods or by the other people you encounter are not necessarily mutual in terms of the experience, where you could be seeing somebody as you imagine them to be within your context, as opposed to how they see you. So I'm curious, like, what you guys make of, again, like this kind of masking layer in order to create this reality that the person's soul will be more familiar with, including how they would see other people.
It's an interesting thought, because I mean, if everything really is mental in the sense that we're no longer part of our physical body, a part of this physical world, we're somewhere else, but where consciousness is being transported somewhere else, then it would have to be that way. You would have to be. It only follows logically. I could be wrong. I don't know, but it only follows logically that you can only really operate in a realm that you're familiar with. Yeah. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that would be the case.
And one thing before Tom responds to this as well, I forgot the best part, was that they exchanged email addresses within this realm, and then he was able to email this guy, allegedly, in real life, and like keep conversations with him. But anyway, Tom, yeah, I'm curious, like, what do you think of this masking thing?
People in many like shamanic traditions and around the world, different cultures have this idea that when they spirit travel, they spirit eject, they have this form they can take, like often like an animal form or something like that. So normally, like the form that a person takes in that context would not be necessarily identifiable as the facial features you know them from in life.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense, because they would be around a lot of animals. Obviously, you wouldn't have somebody who is living in America who would see themselves as a polar bear, for instance, or as like a horned viper that would be much more familiar to the ancient Egyptians. Like that's why they used all these cute little animal figures in the Egyptian hieroglyphics, because that was the stuff that people were familiar with, and they'd be able to identify with it a lot more than something that's a lot more esoteric to them. But anyway, going off of that, I do want to, for the last thing here, talk about, in practical terms, how any kind of change towards getting more in touch with one's original system would work in something like England and something like America. Because England right now, it's big in the news right now, thanks to Elon Musk, a lot of these horrible things that have been going on, in Rotherham. Do you find, as an Englishman yourself, Tom, that people are visibly angry about this, but at the same time are also afraid of pushing it too far? And do you think that something that's going on right now, this clash of cultures, may result in a reevaluation of who the English see themselves as a people? Or would you say that a lot of them are just unfortunately too far gone in terms of being propagandized and living in a state of fear to even consider there being something, culturally, I'm not just talking about just like a blood here, but like culturally, that would unite them, as opposed to people who would want to have them destroyed?
Right. I want to stress as well, firstly, that something's interesting that maybe Americans don't notice from the outside, that there's the rape gang scandal. Most of this stuff is stuff that happened 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. This is not something that's just happened. This is something from ages ago, and it was covered up for ages. And even then, when it finally did all start to come out, like in 2010, like a lot of right-wing people, myself included, were trying to tell people about it, and we were told that it was a conspiracy theory or whatever. And these were things that were already in the past in 2010, and when I was still a young man. And then like a few years later, when it came out, it was all real, and there was some people went to court, and but it was still like it was never given the oxygen in the media it needed. And the people who got angry about it were still seen as extremist, and it was more framed on like, oh, we mustn't allow this to be like a racial issue. There's no actual racial dimension to it, even though there clearly is a racial dimension. And then what's happened now is that all that prompted all this big talk is that someone got hold of the court transcripts and put them on the internet. And then people actually read what was, the details of what was being done to these girls.
It's horrible.
And that's what made lots of people, including Elon Musk, furious. And it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. But I already knew a lot of these stories anyway from before. I've known about this stuff for years, and I've been, involved in the right for. In 2003 I was writing anti-immigrant songs in my school band. But the funny thing is that most of the immigrants in many of the cities now only arrived since 2011. And so they weren't even here when a lot of these rapes were happening. So it's like the population has had a huge spike in immigrants, especially since 2020. Well, the Boris wave during the lockdowns. It was called the Boris wave because it happened under Boris Johnson. But
and by the way, just real quick, it's a great shame because when I think of Boris Johnson, he's one of the few people of power within England who was even interested in something like the Iliad to the extent that he
speak it in Greek. Yeah, he can say.
Yeah.
I was very hopeful for his leadership. I thought he could be a good leader. He wasn't. He was not a good leader at all. Anyway, the answer to the question about the English people, they are being forced into recognizing themselves as an ethnic group. The English have for a long time, part of their culture, the culture of the English, ironically, has been to not be ethnic, to de-ethnicize themselves and to impose ethnicity onto, ethnicity itself is a form of otherism. We see ourselves as not ethnic. And they even refer to foreigners as ethnics, because like the English is the default culture of the world, and then everyone else has ethnicity. But now English people are recognizing that they are an ethnic group and they're being targeted as an ethnic group. And I've been trying to encourage people to understand their history so that they understand that the English are an ethnic group, because they've been brainwashed into thinking that they're not. And I've even been contacted by the brother of one of the girls who was a rape victim, a grooming gang victim. And he was saying how my videos helped him to uncover a sense of self and dignity that had been denied him by the school system, by the police, by the society at large. And now he understands who he is, where he comes from, and it given him a sort of base to shore up his spiritual and mental stability in the face of such a horrific experience for his family, particularly his sister, of course.
But as far as what happens from this, obviously there are people who will assume that if things go into this direction, all of a sudden you're going to have things like concentration camps and, all kinds of horrible things where power will be abused, even if the original reason would have been for the preservation of your own people and things of that nature. Is this something you think that can be approached in the kind of way where you can easily judge people according to whether or not they would want to embrace the culture and the civilization of the English, as opposed to being an active fifth columnist within your country that has absolutely zero reason to be there? Like, is it possible to balance things, or do you think that at a certain point things just get so out of control, like Hitler's Germany having the spirit, according to Carl Jung, of Wotan, the Lord of the Frenzy? Like, is that something that you see as absolutely inevitable, even though you wouldn't want that to be the case, or what?
I'm personally absolutely fed up with the way that in England and all the West, every single political thing has to be compared to and contextualized by the events of the Second World War and associated events that had occurred within Germany during the war and other parts of Europe. It's really tiresome, and in our lifetimes, we're going to reach the 100-year anniversary of that war, and it's got to be seen as a historical event. But history is history, and there's only so much we can orient our entire lives and our entire policies and the way we live according to something that happened so long ago. There are, of course, a certain amount of immigrants we could have. Not Elon Musk. Enoch Powell said this. Take a certain amount of people, but the more of them there are, the harder it is to assimilate, and the more different they are. So we can assimilate more French people than we can assimilate Arabs. We can and it goes on. The more different they are, the fewer we can naturally assimilate, and the longer amount of time it would take to assimilate them. What we've had is the largest migration of human beings probably anywhere in history, and they're not all from one place; they're from all over the bloody place. And they, not to take the blame off them, what are they supposed to assimilate to? They don't even know what their culture. Most of them, they come into a, if you're like a Vietnamese, there are loads of Vietnamese coming now. If you come into a community of Pakistanis and Bengalis and Somalis, and what exactly are you supposed to be assimilating to? Like, there's no actual dominant English culture for people telling people this is what you need to assimilate to. So they don't actually know. So they're all speaking a different language. They don't speak English. It's complete chaos. They have to go. There's no other solution. They have to be deported. We have to tell them, there's no need to be abusive, no need to harm anyone, but they have to go. If they're able to come here, then they're able to leave. It's just a case of making it happen. But of course, some people have been a longer time and they've assimilated, they can stay. But it's a complicated thing. But of course, we can't have everyone in the world on this tiny island. It's like 600 miles long.
No, of course not. I guess the thing that I'm trying to figure out here, using World War II and Hitler's Germany as the prime example here, and I know that a lot of English are sick and tired of being told about that war and all of that. I completely understand. It's not the first time that I've heard that, by the way. But the reason why I'm using that is specifically because it's a good example of this combination of ingenuity, intelligence, along with the utilization of just like completely raw power, and power that's concentrated in things that would give, for example, the creation of fiber optic cable, because allegedly, under the Nazi regime, that's when they had technology of that sort, if not other, completely out there technologies that, a lot of the UFO people like to talk about. But anyway, point being is that there's the combination of this along with the kind of brutality that is not able to distinguish between somebody who, in their heart of hearts, wants to be English and has already conducted themselves in society in such a way as to absolutely be zero problem, and instead actually wanting to contribute and contributing to what it means to be English. That ability to distinguish doesn't exist just because the fire has been activated on the inside, and it's too much for people to be able to sit down, cool off, and say, okay, how are we going to go about this in such a way that we're not going to go against the people who would otherwise be natural allies for us and work with us for the same goal? That's what I mean by the point of no return.
I know, I completely understand why there are concerns, whatever. But in my perspective, if your house is on fire and you got to get the water cannon on it, and yes, some things are going to get wet, but you know what I mean. You've got to accept there's going to be some. Not every single one of your possessions will not be damaged by water if you put that water cannon on your house. But if you don't do it, then it's going to be a lot worse. So that's the way I put it.
But that's why I think it's very important to be aware of these realities, because people have a tendency of saying that, well, we would love for it to be this certain way, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But I'm very happy about the fact that you are being honest about the nature of a lot of people, because there is the intentions that we have, which could be very noble, but then things end up spiraling out of control. So I guess the best thing that could possibly come out of this is there being a way to, ahead of time, organize it in such a way that the fire, or rather the water in your example, has a much more controllable mechanism while not minimizing the amount of power of the water being splashed onto the fire.
If I'm going to stretch this metaphor as much as I can,
yes.
We could
stretch the hose, stretch the fire hose.
If you can remove the oxygen from the building, then the fire won't be able to burn anymore. Now, a lot of these people are coming here because they want freebies. They're not, they're coming here for our generous welfare system. If we cut that off, then they'll go. I think a lot of them will go anyway, because they only came here because they're looking for an easy life.
Sure, that's the libertarian approach, you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things would be fixed just by not having insane policies. As soon as you get rid of the insane policies, people will self-deport or look for somewhere else so they can get some freebies. But
speaking of insane policies, by the way, again, to go with our example here of the fire, there's been horrible fires that have been occurring in Los Angeles right now.
Terrible.
And a lot of this has been attributed to the fact that the fire department budget was cut, as well as these foundations like the Sierra Club making it illegal to do controlled burnings. Which, why would they do that? Why would this environmental organization stop controlled burnings?
That's a wild one. I don't know. So
it almost seems like
California.
they wanted to burn, because there was. I don't want to go too tinfoil hat or like divert the conversation here, but it bears mentioning that there is this plan for 2028 for the Olympics in California, like in Los Angeles, and they're talking about converting it into like a smart city. And when you think about it, this fire ends up consuming a lot of these areas that can then be rebuilt.
Now you can rebuild it however you want to build it. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Fresh start. Yeah, I think there's an anti-Trump, anti-Trump or pro-Trump conspiracy theory about it, because Trump recently said a week or two ago that they ought to be diverting water from Canada to prevent forest fires in America, but that the Environment Agency won't let him because of little fish. And they have to protect the little fish.
The smelt fish.
The little fish.
And now people saying, "Oh, he's done
little
this,
minnows."
He's burning down California so he can steal Canadian water." Maybe, or I don't think that's true, but yeah, people.
I know, it's interesting. But by the way, speaking of Trump, what do you guys make of the whole acquiring Greenland situation?
I
don't think it's going to happen.
Tom,
he said that last. In 2016. She said that it didn't happen then.
I don't. I mean, I have mixed feelings on it. I do admire the idea of, an American Imperium, like the idea of it, like the idea. This is what we did, isn't it? You try to gain, you're growing, and the Romans did it, the British did it, and maybe America's now at the stage that they're going to try and form an imperium and just acquire more territory, and then Greenland might have some great resources up there. But also, I can see why, like, Denmark might not be in the best interest of the people of Greenland to become part of America, and it might not be in the best interest of Denmark to give it away. But then again, Denmark might get a really good deal out of it if they're sensible. So anyway, I'm not Danish, I'm not Greenlander, so I'm not that bothered about the whole thing.
There is a quote that I would like to read from this really wonderful book by Carol Quigley, who, by the way, was a mentor of our President Bill Clinton. And the book is called The Anglo-American Establishment. It talks about this secret society that was founded by people like Cecil Rhodes, a very big figure within the English government at the time of like the early 20th century. And this is a quote from his will, which was written when he was only 24 years old. So that's how committed a lot of these people were back in the day to, like a grander vision. But anyway, it says over here, this is what he wanted: the extension of British rule throughout the world, the perfecting of a system of emigration from the United Kingdom, and of colonization by British subjects of all lands wherein the means of livelihood are attainable by energy, labor, and enterprise. The ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of a British Empire, the consolidation of the whole empire, the inauguration of a system of colonial representation in the Imperial Parliament, which may tend to weld together the disjointed members of the empire, and finally, the foundation of so great a power as to hereafter render wars impossible and promote the best interests of humanity. Any thoughts on that?
Sounds great, but I don't.
Rhodes, yeah, I admire Rhodes as a sort of as a man of character, a great man with great ideas and achieved a lot. But I think that whole globalist utopian ideas I find it quite repulsive. Like the idea of like the ultimate objective of like no war. Well, what if I want to go to war against no war?
Right. When has there ever been no war ever? I don't think it's even a thing.
Yeah. It almost seems like an attempt again to escape the Matrix, but you're forcing a whole bunch of people here who have, maybe they're not at the level of a Cecil Rhodes. And yet you're forcing them to comply with this idea, and it definitely seems like one of those the road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of scenarios. But it does seem like, at least with Britain, the complete reverse happened. Rather than immigration from Britain to all of these different parts of the world, now we're having all the parts of the world like go into Britain. But it does seem, though, I haven't read this book fully yet, that the United States has become like the new bastion of this kind of, you could say, British-inspired worldly globalism. And what exactly do you make of the potential for what this has, because I am personally speaking way more of a fan of that versus the Eastern horde of like China, Russia, and people like that, like the whole BRICS bloc, who I think are incredibly detrimental to having any kind of, regardless of what people like Dugan say, I think that they are very detrimental to having any kind of light within cultures, and detrimental to civilization. Anything that Russia touches, in my opinion, and also fact, turns into complete shit. And I would say the same thing regarding China and the mentality that they have, especially when you combine that with artificial intelligence and all these tracking systems. Like, if you want to picture a hell on Earth, it would be an Earth that is run by the communist Chinese, in my opinion, and also fact. So I'm curious what you guys think of the American Imperium, whether this may end up working out. And the last thing that I would say before you guys say something has to do with technology, the level of technology is at right now, international travel. I don't think we can put those things aside and just think of, well, what did our ancestors do? Because now we have to contend with all of these technological realities. We can't pretend that they're not there anymore. So, so Tom, I see the gears are turning. Let me know what you think.
Well, I have problems with both of those because the Anglo, of globalist vision, which America has taken up the mantle, the white man's burden, as Kipling called it, is totalitarian in the sense that what Dugan would call it, like it doesn't allow for, it assumes the universality of the liberal Anglo worldview. That's prior. It's not that it wants to impose it on people. It just assumes that everyone already has it, but they just haven't realized it yet, or they're all waiting to become the Anglo liberal. But that is not true. And that's the problem with it, because that's what makes it totalitarian, and that's what makes it so toxic when it enforces like gay rights and bombing gay rights into the Middle East and stuff like this.
The George Floyd mural in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's crazy. But then also I don't agree 100%, but you make some good points about China, Russia as well. Like, I wouldn't really like to live in China under the social credit apps and stuff like that. I agree to a certain extent. I certainly agree that it's nicer to live under Anglo-liberalism to the extent that the government leaves you alone and that you can do what you want. That's kind of nice to have a sort of hands-off approach from the authorities, where they only intervene when you cause problems. And I think that's a good form of governance that should be applied generally. But I also think that I'm not a Duganist, certainly. I don't agree with him in a lot of things, but maybe the idea of a multipolar world has some merit, because if you have multiple systems, if you have total homogeneity, then you don't have any ability to adapt. And having diverse ideas about human society in the world in different cultures is probably advantageous for humanity as a whole, because you don't really know for sure which one's going to be the best in any given scenario that might occur in future. So having many different types of society with many different cultural values, many different ideas on how people should be governed might be the best course ultimately.
I understand your point. Where I would push back on is not even push back, but what I would then envision would be something like an Austro-Hungarian type empire living with the United States, as well as, if we want to go a little bit more exotic here, something like the Japanese, for instance, as opposed to something where, if we look back at the Chinese society during, Chairman Mao's time, the Great Leap Forward, these poor Chinese people making steel out of the instruments that they needed to survive, during the wintertime. Like, just when you think about the level of imbecility of a people at that level, that is not something that you want to be spread out. That is something you want to contain. And maybe there could be some way where certain parts of the world that would be a little bit more traditional, let's say, in their own very specific way, I wouldn't say they would be insulated, but you could say that the powers that be could make sure in a certain way that they get to live out these kind of lives without interfering in the lives of other civilizations. So maybe something of that sort could occur, yet still with such a way that maybe there are people who don't want to be stuck in this hellscape as they see it. You could be somebody born with the soul of a giraffe living around, a bunch of donkeys. Not to belittle donkeys, the donkey is a very noble animal, but I think you understand the point that I'm getting to here, that within these societies, there are people who want to aspire to something greater, and there could be a way for that to be done as well. So there could be people who would ingratiate themselves into civilization while at the same time keeping certain cultures and customs from becoming globalized in this, blob-like way. And even the nature of globalization, too. There could be a way that it could be approached without becoming so gay and cringe as has been the case quite recently. So any thoughts on that from both of you guys? And I think we're going to be concluding this pretty soon. But again, I just really want to thank you for being here and doing this. And again, if you guys want to support the show, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, click the bell. The bell is extremely important. And also patreon.com/breaktherules. This show is on Patreon first for the patrons, and then it's getting edited, releasing on YouTube for all of you guys.
It's a big world with a lot of different people who have a lot of different customs, a lot of different traditions, and there's no way you're going to have one hegemon over everything that's going to make everyone happy.
Yeah.
So I think what's important is people is different parts of the world, sort of clinging to their own traditions and keeping those things sacred is primary. And then, international economies can sort of like fill in the gaps and trade and all that stuff. But people, I think it's important that every person, race, tradition, country holds on to their traditions as dear.
And also goes back to those traditions after being within Christianity, you'd say? Like, do you envision something like that happening even for something like the United States?
Yeah. Because I think people in the United States are starting to look at Christianity as maybe the part of the reason why everyone's lacking in spiritual endeavors. They don't believe it. They're saying this is not what my ancestors believed in. This is not what feels right to me. And people want to explore even older traditions going back to the Greek classics, the Roman classics, the Germanic paganisms. People want to explore that stuff. And I think people should do that.
Tom, do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's actually divinely ordained way for man to exist. I believe that. I don't go around proselytizing to Christians and things, because I also believe that for a lot of people who are Christian, if they really believe in Christianity, they're probably okay. That's probably a better life for them than if I convince them to try and completely upend their entire life and try something else, and then they'll need to learn everything from scratch, and that it's hard to do that. So I generally think that it's better for someone, if they actually genuinely believe in Christianity, it's better for that, believe them be, than they become atheist or something like that. Because atheism is really, I think, is a very dangerous. It's quite dangerous for people and for society as a whole when a lot of people become atheists, because there are no philosophical justifications for ultimate moralities then, and it all becomes speculative, and people start to just sort of lose the will to live. I mean, the will to or to have a common idea of what it is to live for.
Well, they end up living for things like like climate change and a lot of causes of that nature, where the experts become their new priests, and they would never admit to this being a religion, even though it is.
Yeah, certainly it's a religion, but it doesn't have any kind of. It doesn't actually answer the great questions that the religions of old attempted to. It doesn't provide you with a connection to your departed ancestors or to the gods who made you or anything. It's just a religion in the sense that it binds you to the other living people with an ideology and with taboos and things that you have to observe. But
and the moments when that becomes very apparent and obvious is when family members die. That's when people realize atheism doesn't have the answers to a lot of the life's hardships, which is burying loved ones. It has nothing for you in that department. It actually will make you depressed.
Mm.
If you start going around saying, well, they're not suffering anymore, they're just completely in nothingness. Like, that doesn't help people. That can be really damaging to a society if that's what's taught.
And it's also strange to imagine nothingness, because I don't buy it. I don't buy the idea that what you are experiencing as an objective observer of reality can all of a sudden just not exist anymore. Like, you could say that during a surgery, when people go under, they're gone, but then again, they don't really remember the times that they're gone, and then they're back.
Right.
So whatever time that you happen to spend not existing wouldn't really count towards this experience. And it goes back to the question, like, why are we here? What are we doing necessarily? Right. I definitely believe in the idea of there being a reason for everything, in the sense that everything matters. So either nothing matters or everything matters.
And that's what my whole point is. It's better to go with the latter. It's better to go with the thing. Things do matter, because most people, the average person, can't handle the sort of perfectly rational universe that nothing really makes any. It's all just chaotic chance. Most people can't handle. Most people need some sort of something.
And I wouldn't say they're wrong. You know,
no, they're not wrong. Yeah.
So it's very interesting, like, the possibilities ahead of us right now. We're going into a hell of a year. It does seem like the final thing that I want to ask you guys: do you believe that 2025 is going to be a very significant year for a lot of happenings, that it's going to be a very transformative year for a lot of people? So let's start with Tom, and then Neil, and then we'll close it off.
I got a feeling that the Nothing Happens bros are going to have to be on suicide watch in 2025. I think there's going to be I got a feeling that this is going to be a year of happenings, or of a happening of some kind. I just get that vibe, especially in Britain, because the palpable rage that is emerging finally from these terrible events, almost entirely due to Musk's new Twitter, but it was there. It was waiting for something like this. They've been stacking up this pyre for so long, and it was just waiting for a spark. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
And don't forget that, as we found out from our good friend Drew Tang, shout out to Drew Tang, there was a book that was written by the Nazi scientist Werner von Braun, who then headed up NASA, a science fiction book about colonizing the planet Mars, and the title of the leader of this Martian colony was called Elon. So there you go. I'm just saying, like, this, it's not a material world. It does feel like we are living in some kind of a thought. And this thought ends up manifesting itself through these very interesting synchronicities. So,
power of art.
Absolutely, it is the power of art. So, Neil, any thoughts on 2025? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, one thing that's for certain is a new regime is about to be taking over the most powerful government on the planet, with not only the Senate and the House fully on his side, but also the Supreme Court and the four most prominent billionaires, Musk, Thiel, Bezos, and Zuckerberg, all getting behind him at this point.
And also, don't forget Mark Andreessen, by the way. Shout out to Mark Andreessen.
There's probably dozens of them.
Yeah.
But the point is, I've never seen anything like this since Augustus. That's how, like, that was the last time in history where one person had all the power behind them to do anything they wanted to. So let's see what happens. I don't know. It could be good. It could be bad. Well, who knows? We'll see.
It's crazy time.
We're gonna find out. That's for sure.
We are. And what is happening in the world of Gnostic Informant? What do you have coming up?
I got it's actually exactly 4 hours and 44 minutes documentary on the late antiquity stage of Roman religion and the Oriental cults that were sort of flourishing at that time period.
Fascinating.
So there's a lot of Julian sources, a lot of the Iamblichus, a lot of stuff on Mithraism, a lot of stuff on the Isis and Osiris cult, the Adonis Astarte Syrian religion, and Dusaris in Arabia, all types of stuff.
Very interesting.
I look forward to that.
And Tom, what do you have coming up yourself?
I've got a couple of things. I'm editing currently a video about the origins and the history of the Germanic swastika, because it's an ancient Germanic, and people have a lot of mistakes about this. Oh, the Nazis.
You're the guy to do that. You're the guy for sure.
I was afraid to do it. I thought I was going to do it, but I was afraid to do it for so long because I thought I'd just get taken down. But I think now it's probably I'll get away with it because it's just, but mostly it's just a survey of archaeology.
The environment feels like it's changing, even on YouTube. Like, I think YouTube is still one of the worst ones as far as the people who are in charge of it. They don't seem to be going the Zuckerberg route, at least in terms of the appearances. Zuckerberg seems to be going in a better direction right now as far as there being far less censorship, replacing the Trust and Safety Council with community notes. So that's all good. But who knows? Maybe behind the scenes, YouTube, per the nature of capitalism, they're seeing like, okay, like these people are starting to change their tune. We don't want to be like the old fuddy-duddies here. So, maybe we're going to take it a little bit easier on some of the things that would have been considered to be verboten to discuss. So, let's keep our fingers crossed there. But as far as BTR, Break the Rules, what we have in store over here is when liberalism fails. We are going to be talking about the nature of liberalism with Orrin McIntyre and Noah Smith. Both of them friends of the show, returning, and I think coming from very different environments. Like if you guys know Noah Smith on Twitter, he is much more of like a like a liberal, more progressive type of blogger, and Orrin is more in the reactionary side. Also works for The Blaze, and then we have cartoon commodification. So this is going to be about animation and the nature of how it's changed, unfortunately, thanks to a lot of these millennials who did not really continue in the tradition of people like, Craig McCracken, Genndy Tartakovsky, like a lot of these old school Cartoon Network directors who actually looked up to they looked up to things of quality, and instead we have all of these people who are
rubbish.
Yes, exactly. By the way, I actually went to school with Rebecca Sugar back in the day. She was a classmate of mine. She did Steven Universe, which again is like the show that really like treats like men, like dirt and babies. This Steven character, who by the way is based on her brother. Poor guy, when you think about it, like his own sister made it. I just can't imagine though being in that state. Like, imagine if your older sister Tom made this cartoon about you. You're constantly being babied by these, 3 women. It's like. Anyway, I wish him the best. So anyway, where could we find you guys, Gnostic Informant?
YouTube Gnostic Informant. I'll come right up. Also, I guess I'm on X, but not that much. But yeah.
No, we got to get you more in there, man. Like you're a firebrand when you feel like it. And
I've been a little bit more recently, actually, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, where can we find you?
YouTube, Survive the Jive, and I will come up. On X, I am Tom Rousel.
Excellent. And you guys could find me on X at LevPo. And again, make sure to like this video, subscribe, leave a comment, share it with all of your friends, click the bell. The bell is extremely important. A lot of people forget about that bell, but it definitely helps in the algorithm. And if you use code word BTR10 at checkout of biltongusa.com, you are going to get extremely delicious South African biltong. I don't know, Tom, if you're a fan of biltong or not.
Biltong. But South African biltong.
There we go. Highly recommended. So BTR10, you're going to save 10% as well as get free shipping. And once again, I am incredibly appreciative of the fact that you guys are supporting the show right now, whether you're watching live, whether you're watching after the show is done. It really does take your support to keep this thing going. And once again, if you guys happen to be in the New York City area, if you become $20+ patrons, you are going to get invited to the various New York City events. We had a wonderful one with Jason Reza-Giorgiani, with Neil, and another Jason Giorgiani one recently with Uber Boyo, which was a lot of fun. We got a lot of people in the audience. They were asking questions, and we all went out for Japanese food and sake afterwards as the after party. And that is about all. I really appreciate you guys being here, talking to me about these very high-level concepts, and we're going to keep the conversation going into the future. So once again, for myself, Lev Polyakov, Gnostic Informant, Tom Rosel, Survive the Jive, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to see you guys later. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.